Hi, this is Lindsay in the Renee's Trial Garden, and today I'm going to show you how we grow our Alpine strawberries from seed. I have two of our varieties here. The first one is the French heirloom pineapple. These have yellow fruit. They're about 1-inch pointed fruit, and they've got such a great flavor of pineapple with a hint of rose. And our mignonette is a French specialty Alpine strawberry, which have a really concentrated strawberry flavor and also a hint of rose. These Alpine strawberries are different than the strawberries that you might think of that you buy at the store. They're smaller, they produce 1-inch pointed berries, and these will bear the first year from seed if you grow them in the spring. They stay growing in neat little mounds, and they don't send out runners like some strawberries do. And these are really great for garden edging or to plant right at the edge of pots. These are hardy and perennial, and they're very ornamental. Here in our mild climate in the trial garden, they tend to be evergreen. And if you're in a colder climate where plants die back in the winter, the tops will die back and then they'll come back from the roots in the springtime. So I'm getting my seed starting mix ready, and I have it poured out into a nice bin here. And what I do first, it tends to be real clumpy at first, so I'll go through and massage it and get all the clumps out so that it's easy to fill flat. There, that's a nice texture, nice and crumbly. And next, you don't want your mix to be too dry. If it's too dry and you sow your flat and you're trying to water in, it'll actually repel water, and it'll be impossible to water in your seeds if it's too dry. So what I do is I go through and I add some water, and then I'll massage it in, and I want this to be about the moisture of a wrung out sponge. Not too wet and not too dry at all. So I've got it all massaged in very well and evenly, and you want it to be just like that, to kind of hold together but still fall apart and be crumbly. Now that I've got my pre-moistened seed starting mix, I'm going to fill up my containers. I wanted to show you different containers that I use for starting seeds. I have these plug trays with 1-inch plugs that I like to use when I'm growing a whole bunch of seedlings. And you can pretty much use anything that's nice and shallow. I have some other seed starting trays. You can also use leftover nursery 6-packs. And everyone's got these food storage containers that have lost their lids. I like to use these too and just poke some holes in them. They make really great seed starting trays. I like to use these more shallow containers for smaller scale seedlings that you're eventually going to transplant and step up into larger containers. The shallowness of the container, it just makes them easier to take out and transplant. So I'll start with my plug tray here, and I'm only sowing about 1/8 of an inch deep. You're going to sow these pretty shallow. You want to make sure you don't bury them too deep, because then they'll have a hard time sprouting up. So I just go through my flat and I lightly make a divot into the soil with my fingers. I've filled this loosely and then tapped it down so that it is not too full to begin with, and I'll just make little divots like that so I can sow right on the top. We recommend sowing about 1 inch apart. These are 1-inch plugs, so I'm going to put, you know, two to three seeds per plug, and in the corners so that they have space. So I'll just throw the seed in my hand like this and just take a little pinch of seed. And I've done this so much that I can really feel the seed coming out of my fingertips. And I'm just going to take in my hand and lightly sprinkle a layer over the top, just aiming for barely covering, about 1/8 of an inch deep. And I'll just lightly tap down so that I get good contact with the seeds, and so when I water, the seeds don't float back up and move around. Okay, so I'm going to water my flat in after I've seeded, and I'm going to start with a really light sprinkle just so that the seeds don't move around. I want to start really light and make sure it soaks in. So I have some strawberries here that are ready to pot up. You can see how nicely they have grown. And this is my plug tray, and then here is my shallow little seed flat that I just broadcast sowed. and in 6 packs where we just sowed right on the surface. So it's taken these about 6 weeks from sowing to be ready to pot up into your containers. I have a flat of 3.5-inch pots here filled with fresh potting soil, all ready to go. And so I really love just to use a regular old butter knife that I got at the thrift store. It's a great tool to lift seedlings out of the plugs. So I just go like this right along the side and lift them up, and you can see that these are just about perfect for potting up. They're not root bound. The roots are going straight down. And so I will just take these like this, make a hole right in the middle of my pot here and drop it in and firm it down. And so I'll go ahead and fill all these up. If you're growing in a little flat like this, I'll show you how I do it. I just take the whole thing and dump it out like that. And this is why I say use a shallow flat, because then the roots are more concentrated in one area. And you can just break off little sections like this and pot these up just like that. So now that I've potted them all up, I'm going to water in. Again, starting with a light spray so that it soaks in without flooding up. And then as these are establishing, I'll just make sure that these never dry out. I don't want them to be overly wet, but I don't want them to ever dry out either. So if you don't have a greenhouse to put these in, I recommend growing in a spot that has a nice morning sun and afternoon shade. And this spot gets afternoon shade and it has like a little bit of dappling to it. So you don't want a spot that's like full-blown hot sun all day, and you don't want a spot that's too dark shady. Just morning sun and afternoon shade is perfect. Here's our Alpine strawberries all grown up and ready to transplant. These are really great because you can plant them in containers, you can plant them at the edge of a garden bed. They're a really great plant to use for like an ornamental, edible feature in your garden because they're really pretty. Plus they get berries on them that you can eat. So I have lots of plants because we grew them from seed. And so I'm going to plant them here at the edge of my tomato plot. And these don't have huge roots, so they can grow pretty nicely with other plants in pots. So I'll rough up the roots just a little bit to untangle them. And plant them where they'll grow right next to my tomato for the season. So I'm planting each of my pots about 8 inches apart, and they'll fill out quite a bit, but then the strawberries will kind of spill over the side. But these don't have runners like other strawberries. They stay in a little bunch. Okay, and I have this little garden bed here, which is just a raised brick planter with plenty of space for plants. And so this is a great opportunity to plant my Alpine strawberries. They make a really great edge for any garden space. Again, I'm gonna rough up the roots just a little bit if I see them winding around the bottom of the pot. This just helps them grow downwards. Otherwise, sometimes they'll tend to just keep circling around and not really grab on. I'll just plant right along the edge here, and they'll look totally adorable in my garden space here. Now I'm going to water everything in. Once you transplant, you always want to make sure to water them in well. That settles the soil around the roots, and it helps them pop back from any transplant shock. So here's our little Alpine strawberries that we planted a while back, and you can see that they're all fruiting now. They start out with these little white flowers, and then they're followed by these nice red small strawberries with really intense flavor. These are some of the best strawberries I've ever tasted. These are really nice because they produce over and over and over. They produce kind of constantly throughout the year, not just one big flush. So they're real small like this, but they are packed with flavor. I had some Alpine strawberries growing in this pot with a perennial vine for several years, and they're so great because they come back year after year, even though we get pretty cold here in our trial garden. And these still come back year after year. And this is now early summer and they're starting to produce fruit. They have these small but incredibly tasty red strawberries. So there's about 5 plants in this pot, and these have been coming back year after year, so they've all kind of grown together. So this is how they'll look after several years. So if you'd like to try your hand at growing Alpine strawberries, you can find our seed at reneesgarden.com. Thanks for watching.